Hello, it's me again, talking to you through my avatar in the Charlian classroom. Today we'll be talking about the wonderful job known as Sage. Sage is classified as a barrier healer, meaning that they have a lot of options to mitigate damage. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't do regular healing, their actual healing output is kind of stupid. To balance out the ease of Sage's healing, they give you a lot of complicated ability names that you just read and you're like, I don't even know, what in the name of Davy Jones Locker is a Druical? What's Synixical? Panheimer? Phlegma? Luckily, I've got my translator's guide right here, so let's start going over what these actually mean. Now, Sage has a couple of mechanics unique to it, but none of them are overly complicated. Sage's main healing resource is called Adder's Gall. You generate a charge every 20 seconds, and you can hold a maximum of 3. These can be used for a wide variety of abilities. Every time you use one of these abilities, you will in fact gain 7% of your max mana. So you get mana by using these resources. Always try to spend the third one as soon as you can, because you always want to be building towards a new one. If you don't, you may end up having mana issues later in the fight, since you don't get mana if you don't use those abilities. Sage's other resource is Adder's Sting. You start with 3 of these every instance now, which is very nice, and you also get one every time your single target GCD shield gets broken. These can only be used for the move Toxicon, but I'll go over that in a little bit when I go over the damage moves. The last thing unique to Sage's HUD is the Eucrasia meter. What the hell does that even mean? The Eucrasia meter basically shows whether you have Eucrasia on or off. Having Eucrasia on basically modifies your single target shield, group shield, and damage spell into just the Eucrasian versions of those spells, which again I will go over later. Eucrasia basically functions as a combo button. You press the button, then you do the combo button after it. It's very easy. However, Eucrasia is very committal, since you can't turn it off unless you do one of those buttons, or you take the time out of your day to right-click the buff to turn it off. It's really annoying when that happens, so make sure you do not press that button accidentally. Other than that, it's pretty easy to use though. Sage's final mechanic, while not really being a unique UI or HUD element, is Cardia. This is basically a set it and forget it dance partner that heals whenever you attack an enemy. With this button, you set it on the main tank and you forget it. The main tank is gonna have that regen and you do not worry about it. But Mr. YouTuber guy, I could put the Cardia on the DPS when they're low and heal them up and be super optimal. And yeah, you could do that. That's probably the way they intended the ability to be used. Fairy isn't always on the tank, so why should your Cardia be? Now in harder content it makes sense to keep it there since they do take a lot, but if you know the tank's not going to take a lot of damage anytime soon, you could slap it on a DPS who you just raised or just got clipped by something and heal them with absolutely no resources on your part, and it's very easy. But if you do that, some random goober frame 1 will type like, why is your Cardia on the main tank, my guy? Put it on the main tank. And yeah, and you know, you can't please everybody. I'm not speaking from personal experience. This totally didn't happen to me. But anyway, I digress. While Cardia is a very good ability to have, it also has a little bonus thing you can do. You have this ability, Soteria, which can be used every 90 seconds, that boosts the healing by 70% for 4 uses. Since every Cardia heal is 170 potency, Soteria does boost that up to 289. So that's pretty much a cure 1 every time you heal. It's very useful. This can be used when a tank takes a tank buster and you want to heal them up because you're too lazy to use other resources, or when a DPS is raised or gets clipped and you could just do the super healing on them without spending anything on your part, and it's super easy, 2 or 3 spells to heal them. But yeah, use this whenever you need to do extra Cardia healing. Now let's move on to all the things that activate Cardia, which is all of your damage moves. The main button you're going to be hitting every 2.5 seconds is Dosis 3. This is your primary damage spell, and just like the description says, it activates Cardia when you use it. This does 330 potency, which is the highest amongst all the healer's personal damage spell, and this is because Sage has no raid buffs whatsoever, so it just does pure damage on its part. Now, since this is your main damage ability, this can be modified by Eucrasia. Using Eucrasia and Dosis, uses Ukrasian doses. Ukrasian doses is your dot, and yeah, you just want to have that on every 30 seconds. And yes, it does activate Cardia, but only when you activate it. It does not do it for every tick of the dot. That would be busted. This does 700 potency over the duration, so please try not to drift this. I do it all the time, and my life is suffering. Ukrasian spells are instant cast, so you can move while using them, but activating them takes the same amount of time as a regular spell, since you need the 1 second to activate Ukrasia, and then a 1.5 second recast timer when doing the Ukrasian spell. You can weave after Ukrasian spells, but do not try to weave in between Ukrasia and the Ukrasian spell. It will not work. You will just clip your GCD and you will look like a fool. Sage's AoE is Dyscrasia. It is an area around them. It is not targeted, and it does activate Cardia if you hit an enemy with it. It is a gain on 2, however you will not get multiple Cardia procs if you hit multiple enemies. That would be kind of busted. Kind of like Warrior's Bloodletting or something. Now, using Sage's unique resource, the Adder Sting, you can do the spell Toxicon. This does do the same potency as a Dosis on the main target you hit, but then does half of that for 165 potency to all enemies around it. This is instant cast, so this is mainly your I really need to move right now, let me use this instead of trying to greed some casts. You can get more stacks of these by putting your single target Ukrasian shield on somebody, however, it is a damage loss to do that in pretty much every instance. Just doing 2 Dyscrasias is more damage than doing a shield followed by a Toxicon. In dungeon pools, you can put them on people in between pools, that way when things happen, they'll break and you'll get the stacks back. But in single target fights like raids and trials, I really recommend spacing out your uses and trying to figure out when you can use them to get away with it. Otherwise, if there was no better option than to put a shield on somebody, then hey, you have a free move later when that shield eventually breaks. And yes, same rules apply. This does do cardio when you do it, but you don't do anything special for the AoE. Now, on a cooldown, Sage does have another unique move called Phlegma. Yes, that is how it is pronounced. This move is on a 45-second cooldown, and you get 2 charges of it. Phlegma does a whopping 510 potency to the target you hit, as well as AoE fall off for 255 to everything else. This does also activate Cardia, however, Phlegma is different from everything else because you have to be in melee range to use it. Now, this is usually never a drawback since you're going to want to be close to the boss anyway, but Sage does have an ability called Icarus, which is a 45-second cooldown dash, wow, that's the same as the ability, in which it will put you in melee range. You can also dash to allies if you need to. Your goal with Phlegma is to try and do 2 of these every burst window. These are your hardest hitting moves, and doing them every burst window is a big chunk of your damage. Since these are on 45-second cooldowns, you can use 1 Phlegma in between bursts, but you want to try and do 2 every 2 minutes. The timing is a little tight, since you'll get the last Phlegma you need to do right when the raid buffs are going to end, but it is possible, and doing that will really up your damage. And since they are on a 2-charge system, you can save the first free one for when you need to use it for movement, so you don't have to use a Toxicon stack when you could just use the Phlegma. And lastly, you have Sage's coolest ability, which could honestly just be a limit break in and of itself. There's a big giant laser beam called Pneuma. While it is a GCD attack, Pneuma is on a 2-minute cooldown, and for good reason. Pneuma does do the same potency as a Dosis, which is 330, and it does an AoE in a line, which will do 132 to all the secondary targets. But its main drawing point is the fact that it does a 600 potency heal in a radius that is the same as Astrologian's Earthly Star to everybody. That's a lot of healing. Now, while that is the same potency as a White Mage's Cure 3, it is also an attack, so you aren't losing any damage by doing it. Not to mention it can hit pretty much everyone no matter where they are, unless they're standing on the exact opposite of the arena from you. This does also activate Cardia on it, but it will most likely not be needed since you will heal whoever you are healing to full doing it. Pretty much try to use this whenever a big burst of damage just hit everybody, because you're going to heal it right back up. That's especially true when combined with what I'm about to talk about next. Before I get into the GCD heals, I'd like to talk about an ability called Zoe. Or Zoe? Zoe? I don't know. Anyway, Zoe, on a 90-second recast timer, buffs the healing of your next GCD heal, this includes Numa, by 50%. So what I like to do is every time I do Numa, I weave in a Zoe before it, and it's always a 900 potency cure. Not to mention if it crits, it's just a full heal. It's the best ability in the game, it's great. But it will affect the other GCD heals I'm about to talk about now. Sage's basic heal is Diagnosis. It does 450 potency and is garbage. Don't use it. This is bad. Don't even think about it. Sage's group heal is Prognosis, which does 300 potency in a group. This is also not great. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use these, but you have a lot of better options that I will go over. But these can be useful in certain situations. Very specific situations. Naturally, both of these do have Eucrasian versions of the move. Eucrasian Diagnosis, which is the shielding version, is a 300 potency cure, which is less. However, it does do a 540 potency shield, totaling for 840. That is a lot better. Along with that, if you just so happen to get a crit, you get a second shield stacked on top called Differential Diagnosis, as well as the shields just being bigger due to the crit potency. It is a whopping 1380 potency if this happens, before crit modifiers. And as stated earlier, if the Eucrasian Diagnosis shield breaks, you do get a Toxicon stack. However, that does not apply for the second shield on a crit, the Differential Diagnosis. Now you also have Eucrasian Prognosis, which is the group shield. It has a cure potency of 100, which is pathetic, and you do a shield worth 320 potency, so that is a total of 420 potency. When these shields break, they do not affect your Toxicon stacks in any way, and frankly, the shields are really small. I really don't recommend doing them unless it's pre-pull, or if you've combined it with a Zoe. It doesn't do a lot by itself. It's not useless, but with how small the group shields are, it doesn't give you the same happy chemicals as hitting a crit single target shield. You also have Pepsis, which will consume the shields to do a certain amount of healing. Unlike Scholar, it doesn't translate the shield 1-to-1 into health. Instead, no matter how much shield they have, it will do a static amount of healing. For instance, no matter if they have 1 shield point left or the full shield, the Eucrasian Diagnosis into Pepsis will always do 450 potency. Now this is both good and bad. Eucrasian Prognosis Pepsis is slightly more healing, and you could do Eucrasian Prognosis Pepsis into Eucrasian Prognosis to just get a ton of healing and then some shields on top. However, you might have noticed that the Pepsis Eucrasian Diagnosis heal is 450, which is less than the actual shield amount that Eucrasian Diagnosis gives you. Now, in super optimal settings, if you have the shield and it absorbs damage but doesn't break, and the person with the shield needs health, and you do Pepsis, you were super optimal and did a ton of super good healing management. But I can name a total of 0 times where that has ever been applicable. I guess if someone's really low and you get the crit shield, you can then Pepsis, which will consume the regular shield to give them regular health while they still have the crit shield. But that is still less effective health than if they just had the 2 crit shields. And Pepsis can crit on its own, so if you don't get a crit shield, you can gamble on Pepsis to be a crit when you do it, but it's still really niche. Honestly, sometimes I'll just use it pre-pull because I put the shields on too early, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be able to reapply these until like 5 seconds into the fight. I might as well just Pepsis and then reapply the shields now. It's like Pepsis is supposed to be a response to losing health while you have a shield, but the shields are always consumed first. So I have no idea in what scenario you are supposed to use these. I don't know. It's not like Sage needs this button to be good, but if it was, it would be appreciated. It's got a funny pose though, so sometimes I like to just press the button. Anyway, that's my rant on Pepsis. Let's continue with the video. And while this doesn't count as a heal, you also have the move Agero, which is just your version of Res on Sage. Just do this with Swift Cast whenever someone dies so you can bring it back. Now, outside of GCDs, Sage does have some off-global shields, which, while they do have lengthier cooldowns, are pretty good for substituting your GCD shields in most situations. These moves are Haima for single target and Panhaima for AoE. Haima is on a 120 second recast timer and puts a barrier on your target for 300 potency. Along with that, it will grant them 5 stacks of High Matinon, which when that shield expires, because it was broken by an enemy, it will use a stack to give them another shield. This lasts for 15 seconds, and then when those expire, all remaining stacks will be turned into a heal of half the potency. Now, while that sounds complicated, it's basically just put shield on, if shield breaks, get new shield, any remaining shields turn into healing that's half as effective. While this doesn't replace the super big crit shield, this can be useful for when a tank is either taking multiple attacks, like auto attacks, or if they take a tank buster. Because either way, you're either going to mitigate the attacks with the shields, or if they take a big tank buster, the shields are just going to heal them up afterwards. When used optimally, that is 1800 potency worth of shields, but I don't think I've ever encountered something where that's always going to happen, so the heal afterwards is still pretty good. And this does apply for Panhaima, the AoE one. While the shield potency is only 200 and the heal potency only 100, it is still very useful to put even if you're just doing it to block a big raid wide. It is extremely effective for multi-target stack attacks such as Akmorns or the Endwalker EX trial stacks, but even if you don't get all the shields used, blocking the raid wide and then being healed for free afterwards is still good. It's not optimal, but even if you just soak one hit with the Panhaima, that's still 400 potency of healing afterwards. No one's gonna scoff at that. That's it for the actual barriers on this barrier healer, but there are still a lot more abilities that Sage has. Kind of one of the main off-globals you're going to want to use is Physis. It's on a 60-second recast timer, as well as being a hefty regen with 130 potency for 15 seconds. It also boosts all healing received by 10% for another 10 seconds. It's very useful. If I can, I like to double weave this when I do instant cast stuff, or weave it in a spell before I do the actual healing, that way it's boosted. As long as you aren't going to be hit by a mechanic in the next 15 seconds that'll do a ton of damage, this is pretty much all you need. Sage's last off global that doesn't use the Adder's Gall gauge is Holos. This is a 300 potency cure on a 120 second recast timer that will also negate 10% of damage for the next 20 seconds. This is especially useful if you're going to be hit by 2 things in a row. You just heal after the first one so that the second one is mitigated, and then you can heal up afterwards with something else. Now we're going to get into everything about the Adder's Gall gauge. Your primary button that you should press, especially when you're capped, is Druocol. This is a 600 potency cure on a target, and it also has a 1 second recast timer, so it is spammable. Pretty much just use this on anyone that gets clipped by anything, use it on the main tank, and this is what you want to use when you're approaching your 3 stacks. Using any of these other abilities when you don't need to might interrupt the flow of things, and you might not have something for later. You have a slightly stronger Adder's Gall ability called Tarocol, which is 700 potency and reduces the target's damage by 10% for 15 seconds. However, it is on a 45 second cooldown. So either use this on the tank or somebody who just revived or has a vulnerability and is about to get hit by something else. Pretty much the most important one you want to use pretty much whenever you can is Caracol. It is a 100 potency regen for 15 seconds as well as 15 seconds of reducing damage by 10%. It is basically Scholar Sacred Soil, but nobody needs to stand in it. You just activate it and it hits everybody. Do keep in mind that Taro Coal and Caracol's damage reductions do not stack. They do stack with Holos, so you can get some extra mitigation like that, but the two Adder's Gall abilities will not stack with each other. Your last ability is XIV. It is a 400 potency cure on a 30-second recast. Use this when you think that all the previous regens mentioned won't do the healing up in time, and you'll be pretty good. Otherwise, just let the regens do the work. Now what I like to do when a big burst of healing needs to come out is do Zoe, Numa, followed by XIV, and that's just pretty much a full heal to the whole party. It'll heal up from any mechanic, just because of how much raw healing's coming out. Now, as I said, you always want that third pip rolling, that way you don't overcap, and that way you have a constant supply of mana, so you use Duracol to do that. But what if there are instances where you really need to pump out the healing? Well, with that, you have Rizomata. Every 90 seconds, you just get a free pip. I like to do it if I have to use my 2 pips in a row, that way I'm not down as much. I'm only down 1 as opposed to down 2. Along with that, if you're really struggling for mana, or you just died and you revived and again you need mana, you can use Rizomata to get a pip and then just spend it on a heal that you may or may not even need at that moment, just so that you are not at such a mana deficit. And the last ability that Sage has is Krasis. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know when I'm supposed to use this one. It's a 20% boost in healing on a single target for 10 seconds, but I don't know when this should be used. Usually, if I need to heal single target, one of the single target heals will just do it anyway, plus the other healer will probably do it as well. And if you're healing in group, you don't really have time to put this on someone who really needs it, because you're just going to heal everyone anyway. You can put this in conjunction with Zoe so that you can get the super large crit shield on somebody. But outside of that, I do not know when to use this ability. I am at a loss. I suppose you could put it on your Cardia target so that they get healed 20% more, but that is kind of a really small amount for just Cardia, but I don't know. But anyway, that just about covers Sage. Sage is extremely easy, and you can just kind of press its buttons when you need it. Planning things out will always help in the end, but your main strategy is just to attack, do weavable stuff in between, and then if you're really struggling to keep some people alive, do a couple of GCD heals. It's honestly not that bad. Sage does struggle though if it's trying to fix a bad situation. If everybody is dying, Sage has the hardest time recovering from it unless it has a lot of its resources available. You can't just medica to everybody to full health when you are a Sage with a really bad group heal. Sage is all about preventing the damage in the first place as opposed to trying to heal everyone back up afterwards. Leave that to the pure healer with the regens and all that. But every time you see some damage coming out, think about how you can prevent that. And with that done, I'm going to go back to my true passion, spreading the gospel of the Shisui set. Hey Alex, have I ever talked to you about the Shisui set?
Would you shut up about the Shisui set? It's non-stop every day. You never stop talking about it. I know.